Well, hello and welcome to today's webinar from Ministry Pacific. I'm Roy Harriman, your host, and we are delighted to be joined by Parker Young, president of Straub Construction, and I will introduce him in just a moment. Our topic today is, if your church is destroyed, could you rebuild? Well, of course you could rebuild, right? That's an easy answer. Well, the answer actually is yes, but the critical factor is, how much is your building insured for? Now, this is an area that most people in the faith-based and nonprofit world don't spend a lot of time on, and so that's why we're doing this today. The value of your building, or the reconstruction value of your building, is based on documents that you have provided to your insurance company. If you don't wade into these waters very often, the question you may be asking is, well, who provided those documents? When did they provide those documents? Where are those documents? What do they say? Have they ever been updated? Often people don't look for this information until there is a crisis, and then it's too late to change anything. So the scenario that you want to avoid, and hopefully that's why you're joining us today, is that, for example, hypothetically, your policy hasn't been updated in 20 years, but you've made building improvements, and those aren't reflected in your policy, or you failed to include important reconstruction costs. Reconstruction is more complicated than construction because there's a building that has to be removed before another one can take its place. But the good news is that you can be proactive right now and make sure that you have the insurance funds that you're going to need if you're ever forced to rebuild because of a catastrophe. Today, we are going to help you forge a link between the insured value of your building and the costs of real-world reconstruction. And so to do that, we have an expert guest, Parker Young, president of Straub Construction and a veteran of the commercial construction industry. So Parker, thank you for joining us. And before we get into the nitty-gritty of this topic, could you please tell our audience a little bit about yourself and Straub Construction? I know that part of your story is an expertise in building churches and other institutional structures, including the church where I am a member. I didn't realize that Straub had built that previous to my discovery. So thank you, Parker, and fill us in.
Well, good to be here, Roy, and very very excited to talk about this. It's what you all are doing is trying to educate your clients and the industry, and that's something that's extremely important. Straub Construction's a third generation company, founded in 1920. So we were able to celebrate our centennial just a few years ago. We focus on working with purpose-driven organizations, and obviously churches. There aren't many more purpose-driven organizations in a church, and so that's something that we really strive for and want to be an advocate for our clients. We use a very transparent and open approach so that they are informed and truly know where it is. So my personal background is grew up in the Kansas City area, went to K-State, construction science degree, been in the industry for 30 years and seen a lot of twists and turns, but very excited. I've been at Straub for 27 years and just great group of people. And as I said, we just strive to be the true advocate for our clients.
One of the statistics that we cite in order to help people make proactive changes to make sure that their facilities will be able to be reconstructed on budget is that 70% of commercial buildings are undervalued for insurance purposes. And this comes from a real estate research company called CoreLogic. So 70% of commercial buildings, which includes churches, are undervalued for insurance purposes. Based on your experience in building and rebuilding, does that number surprise you, seem high, low?
In the last 2 years, the inflation and what has occurred to everything, but especially construction costs, I would be willing to bet that folks that even maybe have done a great job of periodically evaluating and their properties and structures, that if they haven't done it in the last 12 to 24 months, they've they're behind. And we had inflationary pressures of 30 to 40% over an 18-month period.
That's insane. I, I don't doubt it at all, but yeah, I'm sure it's incredibly difficult for you and clients to grapple with those changes.
Yeah, yeah. There was a period basically between 21 and 22 that it was like every week something else was coming up and the lead times are getting longer. And these stats that I'm rattling off are from Associated General Contractors, Associated Builders and Contractors. These are national, and I would tell you that there are regions and pockets that are even greater than that. Kansas City's in a building boom right now that it hasn't ever seen. And so we're seeing even higher inflation than that.
And as I understood your answer there, Parker, the idea 70% of buildings are undervalued in terms of reconstruction. I think what you had said is actually probably it's probably even a bigger problem than that.
Yep, I
Okay.
agree.
Okay.
Yes, yes. May not have been very clear on that, but yes,
Okay.
I think that there are. I would venture to guess that there are more buildings that are undervalued unless they have been evaluated in the last 12 to 18 months.
That is really good to know, because we generally advise people to look at their values every other year. And the information you're sharing here helps us understand, hey, yeah, there's been so much change recently that it'd probably be good to go ahead and look right now, unless you just did it.
Yep, agreed.
So the problem that we're trying to solve is the undervaluation of church buildings or nonprofit buildings for insurance purposes. And so this can be a little bit complex if it's not something we deal with often, but essentially this means that they're not insured for enough money to rebuild their facility. Parker, in your experience, what are some of the main costs of reconstruction that churches fail to anticipate when they're planning their budget and they're setting up their insurance?
Well, there are what I'll call outside. There's hard construction costs, and then there's some ancillary costs. I mean, if it's a catastrophic event that the building has to be torn down, you've got debris, you've got haul off, you've got to get that cleaned up. If it's an older building, there may be hazardous materials, asbestos, lead, PCBs. I mean, there's a number of different things that then you have to mitigate and properly dispose of that are more expensive than just the demo and haul off. Then secondarily, you move into, okay, well, you're going to have a design. And then when was the building built originally? And then now today's codes continue to change and evolve. Many municipalities have adopted the 2018 Energy Code. There are places around the country that the 2021 code has been adopted. The jump from the 2012 to the 2018 code had significant cost impacts from a hard construction cost. There's a long-term benefit because the buildings are more energy efficient, but you still have that upfront cost. And if it's the code of the day, that's going to be their requirement. And we've seen anywhere from 5 to 15% increase in steps, processes, and even the HVAC equipment and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff that nobody even thinks about on what it could impact their rebuild. You have continuous insulation requirements on the exterior of the building, which has to go on before your cladding or your siding or your masonry, that wasn't required even as recently as 10 or 15 years ago. There are sealants and steps that have to be taken. There's even, when you get into the 21 code, there's commissioning, where you have to pay a third party to come in and test the building for air quality and for air loss. There's just a number of steps that can be incorporated or required depending on the code of the particular municipality that the structure's in.
Sounds like a good place to be is to come into a building or rebuilding project as the customer, knowing what you don't know, essentially, because there's so much out there. I wouldn't have, for example, on my list had air quality or even thought about something like that.
And the key to this whole discussion today is truly information and helping the clients understand all the things that are there. They have to obviously, especially with churches and not for profits, they're tight on budgets, and that's where working with experts like you all on figuring out creative ways, whether it be different deductibles or things like that that can help maybe minimize or lower the monthly. But at the end of the day, you want to be covered, because the whole point of the insurance is if something catastrophic truly does happen, you've got the funding there to continue the mission of that particular organization. One of the other factors that'll be interesting to see, and my personal opinion is that this is only going to get worse before it gets better, and that is it's a twofold. Labor costs are continuing to rise because there's a shortage of labor. With the shortage of labor, it's also increasing the duration, which increases the cost. Because if a project takes longer to build, then it takes more money to build it because they're on the project longer. It just does. If you normally would have 10, 15, 20 workers on a project over a period of time, now you may only have 12 or 15.
Wow.
And you've just increased your duration by 25% because it still takes the same amount of time to do work, or man hours to do work.
Obviously, nobody has a crystal ball. How can churches that are planning to have a policy that basically gives them a reconstruction budget, do you have any ideas on how they can take inflation into account? Or there's some historical numbers? I mean, I know you probably have to do that to some extent as you're bidding things that might be 2 or 3 years out.
Yes, I mean, right now what we do is we work together with our clients, and if they're a year out, we will sit there and have a construction contingency for the project, a design contingency for the architect to get, and the design team to get the project designed, and it's still 2 years out. What codes are going to change? What's going to get adopted? There has to be some room in there for them. And then we are carrying a price escalation. And I will say it's a lower rate today than it was, say, in 21 and even early 22, but it's still probably in the neighborhood of 2% per quarter. So if you sit there and go, okay, we're 6 quarters out or a year and a half out from building, well, we're going to sit there and recommend you carry a 12%. Now, as we get closer and closer to quote unquote doing the project, then those numbers will come down. But that at least gives, so from a planning standpoint with the professionals at your all shop, they need to take that into account. And that's where I go back to evaluating year after year on where they think they are on the value of it. And the construction value is different than quote unquote the county value or the valuation. Construction costs are costs, and it's going to cost this to rebuild that. And that's where it's important to have a true trusted professional that they're working with to get a real and accurate number, but that obviously they don't want to overpay, but they want it real.
Very helpful. Yeah, no, and that's very insightful in how you do your best to help clients or prospects to insulate them from the reality of the shock of inflation, so that those estimates are built into the project. And of course, things are always going to be changing. And one thing I appreciate about your approach is obviously you're expert builders, but you're also expert consultants, because you could go in and build, if there is such a thing, the perfect building. But if the communication wasn't there, the consultation about decisions wasn't there, then the price and a number of things would just completely shock the client. So no, I really appreciate the consultative approach that you're describing.
Yeah, we try hard. I mean, I've said this before. We've lost work before because we were too honest. We don't tell people what they want to hear. We tell them what we really think. And then if it's a new build, not necessarily a rebuild as we're talking about here, and it's a situation where it's over their budget, we roll up our sleeves and come up with ideas to help try to bring it into a realm where they can still accomplish the goals and objectives that they have within the budget that they set forth. The issue is in this particular discussion, it's about a structure that's working currently, that's serving its community and its needs. And you aren't likely, there's a reason why it's a certain size, and there's a reason why it's a certain volume of space and functionality. And it's not likely that you're going to reduce that to be able to get it into whatever dollars that they had from their insurance. So that's why it goes back to being important to have a real valuation.
One of the things that I want Ministry Pacific clients to understand is that we are here to guide you through understanding and updating your building valuation. So this isn't something we say, go off and get that figured out and come back to us. It's a totally free service that we provide to all of our clients. And as I had mentioned earlier, we generally recommend revisiting your building valuation every couple years. However, based on the information that Parker shared about the escalation of inflation, it may behoove you to look at it more frequently than that, or at least right now. So please take us up on that. Again, this is a free service, and you want to know that from your insurance, if there's a catastrophe to your building, that you're going to get out of that what you hope to get out of it or expect to get out of it. If not, essentially, it's adding insult to injury in a difficult situation where you've lost your building. And now you find out too late that you weren't adequately insured to reconstruct that building. So please let us know if we can help you with that. If you are not a Ministry Pacific client, we do offer valuation services for a fee. In addition, and I'll talk a little bit about this in a moment, your policy can include related coverages, such as business interruption insurance, for example. And that can provide funds to keep you operating when there is a crisis. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. A theoretical example that's really at the heart of what we're talking about. So First Community Church, again, this is hypothetical, was built in 1993, say 30 years ago. So in today's world, what are some of the building code upgrades, additional permits, environmental regulations that will affect the rebuilding of a church? In other words, how has the earth kind of shifted under our feet since this structure went up sparkling in 1993?
Well, and it's a great question and example. I mean, the reality of it is we've touched on the building codes previously, but that's a significant changes, and maybe possibly zoning, possibly then your utility requirements and what they are requiring. We've encountered where it was a public line that they're requiring to go back to a private line to be built to a public standard, though. And so all of a sudden, you tack on another $200,000 to just get your utilities to the site that, there was utilities there to begin with, but it's a different requirement now. The environmental at 1993 building is in a little bit better shape than one that was, say, a 1975, where there's potential asbestos and lead-based paint, but you still have the regulations and most of the demo and the haul off still have to comply with the local municipal requirements. Some are far more strict than others. So you've got that, and then ultimately the other things that just flat impact, it's bringing it up to today's standards. If you're just doing a renovation of a structure, you only have to spend a certain dollar amount to get it towards today's standard, because you ultimately are grandfathered. But when the structure is gone, now you have to bring everything up to today's standards. So there may be site grading issues. There may be access issues. And all of those types of things now, because of the significance of the project, those are in play.
An access issue, would that be, for example, you've got to add a third lane, maybe to a thoroughfare that runs in front of your building?
It could be that. It could be accessibility, like as in ADA accessibility, where the church was of an age and it was prior to the ADA requirements, where it was steps into the building. Now you have to have an ADA accessible access point. And in some cases, it's harder to do than others. Now, many of the churches have worked over the years to accommodate and come up with, but as an example, maybe it was a ramp before. Well, the zoning isn't going to allow that. So now you got to redo the grading to make it so that it's possible. It does truly require a case by case basis to evaluate the true value of that structure.
Now, in terms of hazardous substances that, again, if you're doing a reconstruction, you mentioned asbestos, lead paint. Do people who occupy those buildings, do they generally know that those substances are there, or does that come as a surprise, or what do you find typically?
I'll say it this way: the more sophisticated building owners know, the less sophisticated ones do not. And the age of the building obviously impacts it. If it's with a large denomination or a parish, many of those have required them to go in and do hazardous material testing so that they have a book and they know what's there. In some cases, they've done the abatement prior to, but in many cases, they haven't. And so that's, again, it kind of goes back to case by case. If it's a small or a smaller individual church that is a community church, they may not be aware that, oh, this was built in 1969 and they bought it from two other churches years ago, and there's still all this stuff there. So it just, it's a little bit of a nuance. The more sophisticated are aware of what is in their buildings, but a church falls into a different classification, especially when you've got children involved. So lead-based paint also is a factor of a greater extent.
I'd be interested in your perspective on another related factor. And one of the things that our founder, Fritz Hahn, one of the things he often notes is that when it comes to reconstruction budgets related to insurance policies, that building demolition and removal are either often left out or done on the cheap. Tell us what's involved with building demolition and removal, what churches need to know, and maybe kind of what makes that so costly. I understand sometimes it can rival the construction costs.
What really can drive that is if there's hazardous materials or the municipal requirements that are in play and the documentation. If it's in an area where it's for lack of a better term, it's basically you're loading up trucks with all the debris and then you got to haul it off. Well, if the place that you have to haul it off to, because it's got hazardous materials in it, instead of it being just 2 miles down the road, it's 15 miles across town, you just consume more fuel, more time, more effort, and thus more cost. So it's something that needs to be thought about and kind of gets shoved to the side. Oh, don't worry about that. It's not that big a deal. Well, if you add $30,000-$50,000 to something that's just, and you didn't have it, well, that's $30,000 or $50,000 worth of stuff you're not going to be able to do to finish it. So those are all things that come into play. And I'm using that on a small scale. You can have demo come in hundreds of thousands of dollars as well.
Parker, in addition to factors that we've discussed already, are there any other surprises or factors that can drive up rebuilding costs that churches need to be aware of?
The important thing is for your clients to understand the steps that are involved for reconstruction, and then take a guesstimate at what they think those costs are, each step. And it doesn't mean that they're just spot on, but they've at least allocated some dollars for these. And it's demo, it's permitting, it's design, it's code requirements, code upgrades. And in one particular, actually in 2 cases here locally, churches have done additions. They were additions, but all of a sudden the county or the city was requiring some basic replatting requirements, which then of course incurred cladding fees that were in the tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars
Wow.
that no one was expecting. No one. So I'm not saying that that would necessarily be the case in a rebuild, but those are all the types of things to at least talk about and think about and evaluate. There's some heavy lifting to do up front, and it sounds like you all do a great job and offer a free service to your clients to do so. If they can do that heavy lifting up front, then it's just an evaluation. What do we see? Is this next year? This valuation we did last year? Okay. Yeah, let's tweak this a little bit here. Maybe there has been some deflation and we've had some things come down and they can, oh no, I think we're okay. But on the other side of it, as you can speak to, we've also seen a lot of interesting movements from deductibles and wind and hail requirements, especially in our area, of what those deductibles have become, and so those are all of these things all kind of tie in together of making sure you're whole and taking the time and effort to get a good solid estimate up front and then go from there.
Parker, a related question. So I'm sure you guys are expert at answering this question is how long will it take? And that's a question that people start asking, I'm sure, like before the end of the first day that they suffer the
Right.
loss of a building. Do you have any guidelines that help churches to anticipate project timing? Now, obviously, you said projects taking longer to get done, but if someone has a 50,000 square foot building that needs to be reconstructed, is there a general guideline, 18 months, 3 years?
There's a process and a time frame in working with the carrier, and if they've got a good valuation, it's going to be easier. I've got a neighbor who unfortunately had a catastrophic fire event, and they couldn't even start construction for a year because they were undervalued on their home. And they had enough money to pay off the bank, but they didn't have enough money to rebuild what they needed. So then they had to go and get funding to be able to cover that gap. So you've got that process, but then from a construction standpoint, you've got a 6-month design and permitting process. And I think that that's relatively, I won't say it's super aggressive, but it's also not, there's longer timeframes with some municipalities and processes. And then a 50,000 square foot is probably a 16 to an 18-month
Okay.
construction duration. So you just got 2 years right there plus. So those are that, and that's not really that uncommon. Now, obviously, to a lesser scale, if it's not a catastrophic and it's just a partial, those things can reduce down and speed up and get operational quicker. But your example of a 50,000 square foot facility that was a total loss, I 2 years would be, I think, pretty quick.
No, that's really helpful. And for people like, which is most of our clients who don't fortunately don't have experience with this, that's a great big picture to kind of have in mind. One component that I alluded to earlier that can be part of an insurance policy related to this is business interruption insurance, and funds from business interruption insurance can cover a place to meet, renting equipment, even payroll shortfalls if that's an issue. In your experience, or even just information you've come across, how have churches effectively managed the in between times when they don't have a place to meet, but there is a place to meet that's being built?
Oh, I've seen a variety of things done. I mean, I've seen some that reach out, to the old way of going to the schools and school district and meeting in the multipurpose room. In some cases, you've seen fellow churches share space. There's a variety of things that are done. It just really depends on how large the community is and what the resources are. But to your point, what you don't want to have happen is to not have what is needed to be able to keep that church, that parish together for the long term. That, okay, this is a catastrophic event and everybody is disappointed and saddened, but now it's like, okay, got to roll up our sleeves. It's going to be a 2 year time frame. This is what we're going to do for that 2 years, and we can't wait to get back into our own church and serve our community as we were doing prior to that.
Excellent information, Parker. I really appreciate you sharing it with our clients and others who are joining us. Before we wind down today, are there other things that you would like churches to understand about this topic of having a reasonable plan to reconstruct in the event that it's a partial or total loss of a facility?
The thing that I would say in kind of in conclusion or wrap up is you've got to start somewhere. And it seems a little bit daunting at first, but you just start working at it and building it and talking it through. And then, as I said earlier, having the doing the hard work up front on the first time, and then doing an annual review or every 18-month review and saying, okay, these are good. That's so invaluable. And the key to that is having a trusted advisor that you are confident in. I mean, that's why we take a very, very transparent approach. We lay out for them all of our costs. We lay out what the fee that we would be making on it is. We explain all of it. We talk about the durations so that there's no funny business. These are the true costs. They understand it. And hey, they want to poke a hole in it. Why does it cost this much to do this? Well, here's why. The availability of this material, or this is a particular specialty material, or this is a very labor intensive product to install. Whatever the issue is, having that dialogue and just open, honest, transparent discussion.
That's what you want in a construction partner, whether you're looking to do an expansion or whether you a greenfield new build or a reconstruction process. So if you are in the market or have questions, we encourage you to follow up with them. If you are needing to reevaluate your building's proper value and make sure that it's adequate for reconstruction, please contact us or anything related to property or liability insurance needs. We hope this webinar, thank you for joining us, everyone. We hope this webinar is really the beginning of the conversation. As Parker said, the heavy lifting really is on the front end. Once you have a process going, then it's easier to update it as you go forward. And Parker, thank you for joining us. And thank you, everybody else, and have a wonderful day.